The GDP for the second quarter is actually revised up to 3%. So that's 0.2 percentage points higher than the 2.8% that was the preliminary estimate from the government. And that's good because GDP is kind of a broad measure of economic output. When GDP is expanding, it means the economy is growing. It means things are going in the right direction. So when you see a 3% growth rate, that's pretty strong, historically speaking, and also especially strong since the Fed has kept interest rates so high, and many economists expected the economy would be contracting even by now.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, there's been all this talk about DEI and major corporations, and you've written a story about the Ford Motor Company. What's the sort of DEI situation happening with Ford?
Yeah, so Ford's CEO just put out a memo to employees basically saying that they're scaling back some of their diversity, equity, inclusion goals, their DEI goals. You might have seen DEI has gotten a lot of attention in conservative media, conservative circles. Conservative activists have really pushed back on this kind of corporate push to there's, in these big companies, there's whole offices that are just dedicated to like pushing these DEI policies, procedures, and so Ford just came out and said that was scaling back some of those. So a lot of companies have things known as like affinity groups or resource groups, and those are opposed by a lot of people on the right because they're like groups that are not explicitly, saying you only can be of a certain race if you're in it, or you can only be of a certain religion or something like that. Right. But they're like groups like Amazon has one called like Asians at Amazon, Blacks at Amazon. So they're clearly targeted to minority and racial groups. So Ford said it was going to be dismantling the kind of identity-based ones in lieu of ones like community development, workforce development, that sort of thing, more mission-oriented groups. And then it also said that it was going to remove itself from the human rights campaigns, which is like a gay rights group, from their scoring. So each year they come up with scores for how they view working at those companies. So they're removing themselves from that as well. And it's been kind of a part of a growing trend. John Deere, Harley Davidson, some other companies have recently also like tempered their approach to this, and it really started after the 2023 Supreme Court decision that found that affirmative action can't be used in selecting students based on race in the education process. So companies are kind of seeing that and saying we could be next, they could be coming after. Let's get our ducks in a row here.
So it's more of a worry about the legal threat than maybe alienating conservative customers or customers who might not like these types of initiatives?
I think it's both of those things. And I think that a lot of that public pressure, there's this activist named Robbie Starbuck. He's has a huge platform on Twitter and on other social media platforms like LinkedIn, and he's kind of used that public persona and that pressure of all of his audience and his followers to push back on these companies that have some of the more extreme DEI policies. And so in a lot of these cases, he's reached out to them preemptively and said, look, we're going to do an expose on you. Are you going to change any of these? And some of these companies have started falling in line and changing their policies as a result of that sort of threat of activism, if you will. And it seems as though other companies are, kind of following suit because they're seeing their fellow corporations doing the same thing, and it kind of gives them a little cover to not be like the first one to dip their toe into like pulling back these DEI policies. So I think it's a trend that might continue in the coming year as the kind of pressure against this DEI atmosphere grows.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about the revisions of different official economic statistics. Yep. Sometimes those revisions are bad news, sometimes they're good news, and so this week we've received some good news, no?
Yeah, so the GDP for the second quarter is actually revised up to 3%. So that's 0.2 percentage points higher than the 2.8% that was the preliminary estimate from the government. And that's good because GDP is kind of a broad measure of economic output. When GDP is expanding, it means the economy is growing. It means things are going in the right direction. So when you see a 3% growth rate, that's pretty strong, historically speaking, and also especially strong since the Fed has kept interest rates so high, and many economists expected the economy would be contracting even by now. Right. So it's one I guess feather in Harris's hat that she could tout about the economy. There's other negative signs of the economy. The labor market's slowing. Obviously, inflation, cumulative inflation, is still about 20% higher than what it was in January 2021. So I think the negative factors in the economy, especially inflation, are still weighing down on voter perceptions of the Biden-Harris administration, and I don't think that GDP numbers and just that data point alone are really going to be enough to recoup economic support on her side here.
Right. So you've written about a member of Congress who's owned a grocery store, and this lawmaker has had an adverse reaction to some of Harris's economic proposals. What did they have to say?
So one of the only new economic proposals that Harris has proposed since getting in the race is basically, and it's the details of it aren't really clear, but basically she wants to stop price gouging, so corporations from raising prices beyond what's reasonable. But a lot of economists say that that is kind of akin to price controls, and that historically has never worked when it's been tried. It just creates scarcity, shortages, and grocery store closures. And so I spoke to Michael Rulli, who's just became congressman out of Ohio's 6th district this past year. He won a special election when the sitting congressman retired to go be the president of a university in Ohio. Right. And so, I believe he's the only grocery store owner in Congress right now, so he has kind of a unique perspective on that. And he was saying that it would be a complete disaster if her plan, and again, we don't know the fine-tooth details of this, but if her plan would have been implemented, he predicted that, he said, I think they stocked something like 28,000 various items on their shelves, so you expected that to be cut in half or even more, just because of the shortages, if that were to occur. But again, it's light on details, so we don't really know what that plan would entail. And a lot of people I've spoken to kind of see it as an election year stunt, that she's kind of sees how bad inflation's hurt everyone, how everyone's complaining about grocery prices.
Right.
So it's just trying to propose this, and it doesn't really have much of a chance of actually becoming law, because Congress, I don't think, is going to pass something like that.
Perhaps Harris will go shopping for new economic policies.
Perhaps so.
Thank you, Zach. You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.